GOB, Goods on Board, by Simon Mayle. 1. To most fellows, this business of expulsion was not something to be taken too seriously. But to mothers, all of them I reckon, expulsion was certainly an evil and rotten crime, even if it was an accident of sorts. I was thinking these things on the way back from what must have been my 5th school in 3 years, and I was looking out the window of the cab. I always took cabs home after expulsion, and I reckon I was probably doing an awful lot of trembling too, for old Mama could be plenty fierce when she wanted to be. When we pulled up to the curb outside our home, she was standing there on the top step, all moody gloom and wearing black. I paid the cab, and we went inside. As I expected, we did not talk for the first 10 minutes or so. We didn't say hello. We didn't kiss, shake hands, look each other in the eye, discuss the weather. Nothing. We did what we always did on those special occasions. The suitcases were parked in the hall of our ground floor flat. I was led through to the kitchen. I was instructed to sit on one of the wooden benches at the pine table, and old Mama made the tea. It was like that every time. I bit my nails. "Here," Mother said, passing me a steaming mug. I took the mug and she sat down on the bench opposite, saying nothing. I started fidgeting, and still nothing was said. We sipped tea, and I picked at my palms. I don't mind telling you I was nervous then. She was a champion at making a boy nervous. Eventually she asked me why I did it, and I couldn't tell her because I didn't have too much of an idea myself. So I muttered something and took cover. My mother suffers from a terrible temper. I think it's the Irish in her, and when she starts she is a very difficult lady to stop. Impossible, some would say, my dad in particular. I watched her boil over, always ready to duck underneath a vicious left that she had a habit of unleashing in moments of extreme frustration, always ready to run if the situation degenerated and she started to become all rabid. I heard things like this: "How can you do this to us, James?" That's my name. "After all we've done for you, after all the sacrifices and hard work and tears that have been invested," a key word, "in your past to enable you to travel life's many rocky roads and reap the rewards that only a good education can offer. Don't you realise that in order to get on in this world, one must have qualifications, that in order to strive to achieve great things, one must have a solid educational background," etc., etc. Well, this sort of jabber went on for 10 minutes or so. Enough time to strip every nail from my finger, pick every loose bogey in my nose, and pray to the good Lord that something would interrupt this all-righteous soliloquy. I think he must have been listening, because just at the point where I was about to be banned, I think for life, from ever doing anything, the telephone rang. Now, due to my mother's weighty social commitments, the telephone is enshrined in a reverential position in the hall, underneath my mother's portrait, and treated like a god. When it rings, it demands to be answered. It is like a holy summons, normally with an invitation for lunch, or dinner, or the theatre, or some gala opening, or ball, or whatever, and to leave it ringing is sacrilege. Inside, I smiled. Mother fled. It was Lucy, with an invitation for lunch to meet some super people. To me and my little brother she was known as Juicy Lucy because of her size and salivating habits. She was a real case, and she loved Pook. She liked to fondle him, openly. "Does the Diddy Withams like to be tickled then?" she'd say. That was her excuse. "No, get lost, Lucy," my little brother would say. But it never did any good. She'd maul him, thrusting his poor little head into her ample bosom, cooing like some bloated and rancid pigeon. "Come to Auntie Lucy," she'd coo. "Just want a teensy-weensy cuddle, you gorgeous little creature." Now don't get me wrong, I really like women, but this 13-stone pervert hofferlump was too much. Though, on that day, Miss Lucy sprouted the wings of an angel, saving my poor soul, and indeed my little ears, from a hellfire of a roasting. After 20 minutes on the phone, a short conversation, I heard Mother's footsteps return on the creaky wooden floorboards of the hall. Her small, quick steps were a sure sign that our little talk was soon to be concluded. It was, and I was to wait for my father's return from the office so that he could pull the wind out of your sails. Then, after one final "How could you do this to us?" gaze, she left. As you can see, her conversation is sprinkled with all sorts of champion metaphorical cliches, and that last one about the wind and the sails had me puzzled for a bit. I was tempted to question it. After all, there is no wind that I know of that has handles, but questioning such things only invites an earful. I should tell you now about our glorious flat, about how long we have lived there, about who lives there, what it looks like and all that other rubbish, but I won't. I'll tell you about my room. It is certainly the best room in the flat, armed with a lock to keep out the fossils, and graced with a window for hasty escapes up the drain pipes, in cases of emergency. This window was the second door to the flat. It provided access to the roof, via the drain pipe, and Miss Arnold Harrison's window box, and then, from the roof, there were stairs leading down to Pavilion Road. A valuable asset. The room was a mess when I walked in. Everything was in its place. The beds were made, the posters were straight on the wall, the carpet was hoovered, it even smelt clean. It took me 20 minutes of hard labour to organise the room so that it had some reasonable semblance of its former glory. I pulled out my socks, slung them on the floor, emptied the contents of the suitcase on one of the beds, unstraightened a few posters, closed the window, opened all the cupboard doors, got out all my dirty magazines, and then, when I was satisfied that things were looking better, I had a snooze. Pook woke me, pouncing on me like a pussycat. He does that all the time. "How are you, Pook?" I said. He laughed. "You got kicked out again?" "No, half term." "Liar." He was sitting on the bed opposite, all 5 feet and 2.5 inches of him. He had the dog with him. He's a great brother, though just a little too popular with the ladies. Every girl I ever brought home would invariably hug him and kiss him and say how sweet he was, and of course he could make them laugh, which loosened everything up a little and helped me out no end, as I was always nervous. At the age of 11, I'd say he had felt more chess in his life than most men would think of in a lifetime. Sometimes my girlfriends would drop by the flat just to see old Pook. Fortunately, he was open to bribery. A Mars and 2 packets of opal fruits would see him out the door, leaving me in the company of my loved one. "What happened this time? Did you swear at anybody? Did you? How about hit someone? Did you thwack a teacher? Did you? Well, did you?" I told him I didn't want to talk about it. It made me too upset, and as he wasn't yet familiar with the emotive forces that are at work in the body after such a traumatic event, it would be better if we talked about something else. Like Marie, my mother's pretty French helper. He didn't want to talk about her, as she was the culprit responsible for keeping his room tidy, and as a consequence, some rotten stick of sherbet that had been hidden and saved for a very special occasion had gone missing. "Who told you?" I said. "Mum." "Is she back?" "With Lucy and some other people. I think she's drunk." "Are they going out this evening?" "She said they might go to the theatre if they could get Marie to babysit." "What's wrong with me?" I said, and of course the answer was simple. I was not responsible enough to be allowed to look after my little brother on my own. I needed assistance. I needed assistance to accomplish the simple task of looking after myself. And Marie's assistance was a joyful assistance, for it would not be false to say that I harboured secret and passionate visions of the two of us sharing an idyllic happiness in a faraway land. I was very naive then, but she did have big tits. They were something. "Is Dad home?" I asked. "Not..." And then the doorbell rang. Instantly, I dispatched my trusty brother with strict instructions, lies, of my whereabouts. As it was 6:30 in the evening, it could only be my poor tired dad that was ringing the bell at this hour. The ruse failed, and within 3 minutes I heard the fearful and ponderous step of my father on the floorboards of the hall. I hid. "James?" he said in that pompous voice of his, as the bedroom door opened slowly. I did not answer. We had played this game many times in the past, and I was well acquainted with the fact that old fossils aren't too fond of bending, hence the choice of hiding place, in the darkness under the bed. In summers past, Pook and I had made a regular wage from simply following my granny about her house during our stay there, picking up all the things that she dropped or knocked over. He found me within 5 minutes. "How are you, Dad?" said I, smiling and crawling out from my lair. "Good to see you looking so well." Father did not seem too happy. He didn't reply. He made me feel uneasy with a gaze that he used, one that was reserved for the most weighty matters. I looked up at the ceiling, I looked at the walls, I even untied and tied my shoelaces, waiting for him to start. "James, James, 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 James," he said over and over. "What are we going to do with you?" He let out an enormous sigh, shifted his position, and waited. I looked at him and tried to assume a meek, modest, and shamed look. "Well, to tell you the truth, Dad, I don't rightly know." This was probably the only truthful statement I made throughout our little talk. I promised him that it wouldn't happen again, that I was indeed very sorry, that in the future I would not mix with the bad elements in the school, etc., etc. Then we discussed my future. It was not much of a discussion. The short and long-term effects my expulsions were having on my mother. She came out in a terrible rash that had to be treated immediately by the most expensive dermatologists in Harley Street, and at the end of the quarter there was a significant rise in the telephone bill. And to top it off, there was the question of what I should be doing with myself during the summer months. There was a slight pause, then inspiration humped its evil way into the dirty part of the mind in the beautiful and curvy form of young Marie. I instantly set forth a proposal which, under the circumstances, I felt was quite admirable. I suggested that I should be sent abroad with young Marie as chaperone, interpreter, and teacher. Unfortunately, he didn't think this was a particularly good idea. He mentioned something about me not deserving it. Of course, I argued with great enthusiasm. I pointed out that I had not yet passed any of my French exams in all of my 17 years, and that if I were to, I would be out of his hair for the summer. A sore point with him, considering he does not have much. And that by the time I returned to England, I would undoubtedly be fluent in the language. "No, James, no. I have an idea of what would be best, and it certainly does not entail a trip to foreign parts. No." The old man shook his head and smiled. "Marie's parts aren't foreign, Dad." "What did you say, boy?" "Nothing, Dad." There was an awkward pause, and then he dropped the bomb. "I think," he said, "it would be a jolly good thing if you spent this summer working, don't you?" "Working?" "Yes," he said triumphantly. "No! But you must, James." I retreated into a state of shock, unable to answer. Work? Was the man a loony? After 5 grueling weeks at a learning establishment, a boy needs a rest. A 5-week rest, to be precise. I wasn't going to work if I could avoid it. But I did not want to argue. I harboured vicious thoughts of a beating to be handed out by my dear old dad and his faithful steel ruler. "You're right. It's a great idea. A real cracker. I'll get onto it in the morning, first thing." "Yes, sir," I said. The old man smiled his best wrinkly smile, mumbled something about thinking I'd see it his way, and left. That night I suffered the worst nightmares I would remember in all my years.